First off, before going to the check ride, what I would want you to do is kind of two things. One, research the examiner. More than likely, other students in that area, or even the flight instructor, has had personal experience with that examiner. What's his personality like? What is he into? Like, is he a sports fan? Like, does he like football? What are his interests? Or every examiner has things that they like to focus on. Like, I had an examiner one that was really big on electrical systems. And so the word on the street was like, before you go for the check ride, be sure and study the electrical systems. So every DPE is going to be different on the stuff that they hone in on. And then a lot of times when they do a check ride, they'll ask kind of the same general questions in the same general format that they have for previous check rides. And so you can get what's called a gouge. Think of it as intel or research on the examiner himself or herself to find out, like, what do they like to ask? What questions are they honing in on? Or what are consistent patterns over the number of students? And then after your check ride, if you so choose, you want to help out other pilots, you can write down all of the questions that you remember that he was asking and provide your own gouge. And a gouge is, again, just like a high-level summary of this is how long it took, this is the questions that he focused on, these are the maneuvers that we did, here are the questions in the air that he asked, those types of things. So it's kind of like an intel report on the examiner. That's prior to the check ride. You want to research the examiner and then find the gouge or previous students or even your instructor and talk with them about this particular examiner's idiosyncrasies or particularities. Okay, get a good night's sleep. I know anxiety level is going to be high, and it's going to be a challenge to fall asleep because you have vested at this point a lot of time and a lot of money into your training. And so the anxiety level is going to be high. And the first 3 or 4 check rides that I took, I was getting sick. I would go into the bathroom and I would vomit. I wouldn't eat for days. I would just be like white, like my skin would be just pale and just disgusting. I would like clammy hands, like anything and everything that raised my anxiety or demonstrated that I was full of anxiety was prevalent. And then I kind of worked with a professional counselor, and they said, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Like, are you going to die? Well, probably not. Okay. So then the worst case scenario is going to be failing the check ride. Okay, then what happens? Well, if you fail a check ride, you have to go back to your instructor, get signed off on the areas for which you were deficient, and then you go back to the examiner, and then you take that portion of the check ride again, or you have to redo the entire check ride, but then eventually you're going to pass. So whether it's I'm passing today or I'm passing a week from now, I'm still going to pass. So that helped me personally just kind of reduce the anxiety of like, all right, what's the worst case scenario? Yeah, we're probably not going to die. At the end of the day, the examiner is a highly competent and experienced pilot, and safety is always on his mind. So if you get yourself into a situation that he feels uncomfortable, he's going to take the controls, and most likely you guys are going to be fine. So you're probably not going to die. So if I can eliminate the worst case scenario, and then the second worst case is me failing the check ride, which I've done. It's embarrassing to say, but I've used those failures as learn from my mistakes for my students. And it is humbling to say the least, but at the end of the day, like, nobody really cares. Like I said, unless you're going for the airlines, and even then, when there's a big hiring boom, they don't really care. They'll ask you, did you learn from your mistakes? At the end of the day. So check rides generally last, I usually tell people, like 4 to 6 hours, from soup to nuts. Sometimes it's on the shorter side if everything goes smoothly and you have all your ducks in a row, and we'll talk about that in a second. And if you're a little bit unsure of yourself and the examiner has to probe a little bit more, it may go a little bit longer. So 4 hours or 6 hours is kind of generally the time frame that I use for check rides. So I need to eat, usually some snacks, like a trail mix or granola bar, like whatever kind of snacks you like, fruit, and then like water. I like drinking lots of water. A lot of examiners will take payment in the form of cash. And so not everybody has, their that much cash on hand. So you may have to visit the ATM on the day before or whatever, or get a cashier's check or whatever is appropriate for the examiner. So in your research of the examiner, you'll come to find out, okay, what are his rates, or her rates for the check ride, and how much is it going to cost? What method of payment does he accept? Can I do a check? Can I Venmo? Like all of that type of stuff, right? DPEs are literally trying to get a feel for you as a pilot. Like at the end of the day, I like this question. Would I feel as a DPE, if I were a DPE, would I feel comfortable with you taking my grandmother up for a helicopter ride? Or would I feel comfortable with you flying my children around? I want to feel that warm and fuzzy as a DPE. Dress professionally, like a collared shirt. You don't have to show up in like suit and tie. I mean, some people have for airline interviews, obviously, but like for check rides and stuff like that, dress professionally. So at least a collared shirt in some form of non-jeans, slacks, or if it's like hot summertime, then shorts that are khaki shorts or, something equivalent. Don't look like a slob. So don't wear pajamas, don't wear sweats, don't wear ripped stained shirts, come with the appearance of you are taking this seriously, because at the end of the day, flying is a little dangerous. It can be dangerous. And so you want to have that warm and fuzzy feeling about the pilot that you're flying with. And if homie rolls in like a faded, ripped short board shorts and a Hawaiian t-shirt and flip-flops, my opinion of him is going to go down dramatically as a designated pilot examiner. It's completely different if I have known this person for, a number of years, and this is like how he normally dresses, and I find that his flying is normally professional, but chances are you're not going to have known the DPE prior to your check ride. So dress professionally and act professionally. Be early. So I recommend at least an hour early to your check ride. That way you can check whether pre-flight the helicopter, and then file a flight plan if you need to. Make sure that you have the maintenance logs for the aircraft. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we're going to have to kind of get together prior to the check ride. And so, an hour early minimum, sometimes maybe an hour and a half. It really kind of depends on if you did a lot of preparation the night before or if you're kind of scrambling the day of. You also need to get a weather briefing. So depending on how far out you're going to be flying, what I'll do is I'll get a standard weather briefing like in the morning, and if it's clear in a million, then I'll get an updated or abbreviated briefing in the afternoon. If you're like the night before, you can get an outlook briefing. So those are some options. And then after the oral portion, prior to flying, you can get a standard briefing or an abbreviated briefing as so desired. Filing a flight plan may be required, may not be required. It kind of depends on the examiner. So it helps to kind of clarify his expectation or his or her expectations prior to showing up as well, right? As a general rule, what I highly suggest is be prepared and organized, okay? So what does that mean? What I suggest creating is a check ride binder. It's like for all of your documents and everything. First off, you're gonna need some kind of a flight plan. Every single check ride that I have taken, whether private, instrument, commercial, or my ATP ride, regardless of if we execute all of or a portion of that flight plan, you're going to have a flight plan created. And again, this goes down into the research of, hey, Mr. DPE, I want to check ride with you, let me know what I need to plan. And so he's going to say, okay, we're going to go from this airport to this airport and so on and so forth. And so you have to have the flight plan all done, so that all the whiz wheel stuff with the E6B and all of the nav logs and everything like that. In addition to that, you're going to need the weight and balance, right? So the examiner is going to tell you their weight ahead of time. He's 180 pounds, In addition to the weight and balance, you're going to need like performance charts. Now, having the POH or a copy of the POH is acceptable. If not, you can run off some printed copies of performance charts, because inevitably he's going to ask you about performance. How many inches of mercury can we pull, here, or what percent torque, can I use there, that type of thing. So you're going to need to have a copy of those chart. So either in the POH or a printed form. And then checklists. A lot of flight schools will just issue you a laminated checklist, or if not, have your own laminated checklist from the POH or from the aircraft that you're flying. I also recommend having a few sheets of like scratch paper, just, printer paper, anything that you can just write on, because there may be some times that you're kind of sketching out pedostatic system diagram, or, rough estimate of the kind of fuel system and how it kind of works, So the other one is IACRA or an 8710. Some examiners like both. It was a kind of not too long ago, it used to be paper copies only. It was an 8710-1 or whatever, and then you'd have to fill it out, and then handwritten, very neat and nice and tidy. But now we're filling out the IACRA, and then you can issue or print off a copy of the 8710 afterwards. So you need to have your IACRA done and filled out with all of your hours and everything updated. And then in addition to that, you need to print out an 8710 or a copy of an 8710. And then stick that in the binder, just so you have a backup. Now, in addition, with the IACRA filled out, you also need the login info for your login, because what's going to happen is the examiner is going to log into their computer in their IACRA login, because they have a cool login, and then they're going to say, okay, I need your login info, and then they're logging you into a check ride. And so it's basically like, okay, I, as the examiner, am starting a check ride, and I need to attach a student to that check ride, and so I need his or her login info, and then I, now have a student attached to that IACRA check ride, because once they start the IACRA timer, it's literally there on the clock. At that point, it's like, okay, now we have started our check ride. So they'll need your login info. So be sure to have that printed out or written on a sticky note, that type of thing. You also need your personal logbook, with all of the hours. It's helpful to tab that, for endorsements, especially for private guys. You're going to have a number of endorsements that you're going to need for to be able to take the check ride. But then before taking the check ride, you also need the cross country endorsements, the solo endorsements, the long cross country endorsements, and then if you're flying the R22 or the R44, the SFAR 73 sign off, those types. In addition to your logbook, you're going to need your aircraft's logbooks, and so literally the maintenance records. And there's generally two of them. There's going to be one for the airframe and then one for the power plant. So, for example, in the R22, there's an airframe logbook and the engine logbook for the Lycoming. And so you have to go through there and find and be able to demonstrate to the examiner when the last annual inspection was and when the last 100-hour inspection, and if there's any service bulletins that have been completed and all that fun jazz. So you'll need the aircraft logbooks, which are usually held with the maintenance personnel. So you need to get those. So that's why we arrive a little bit early. And then the aircraft keys. Now, kind of depending on the format in the flight school that you're working with, sometimes you can go grab the keys and the flight school's log, and you're good to go. Sometimes there's going to be people that are renting it prior to you actually taking it for the check ride, and so you may not be able to have the keys. But anyways, that's something that you're going to need to go fetch at some point in time. Okay. And then think of also the idea of fetching things. This is going to be kind of weird. You are hosting the DPE. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the DPE, he's a pilot. He's been there probably a million times. Take on the idea of that you are hosting the DPE, meaning offer them coffee or water. If you need to go get the keys, or if you need to go fetch something, be a good servant. Like, yeah, stay there. Let me go get this for you. Be a good host. Like, think of the DPE coming into your house and you're hosting them in your house. Have that kind of servant mentality or servant attitude with the DPE. Once you're there, it's going to be a table in between you, and you're getting all your books out. You're going to put the payment out, or some form of payment, and then you're going to have the 8710 or the IACRA login sheets ready to go, because they're going to need that. You're going to need your photo ID, and the photo ID, the number of letters in your name and middle name and last name has to exactly match the 8710. Otherwise, it's going to get kicked back and it's going to be this thing. So if you're using your photo ID, whether it's a government like state issued ID or you have your passport, whatever ID it is, your name and address and everything have to exactly match what is printed or written in the 8710 or logged in on the IACRA. So be sure that names match, birth dates match, and then also for your medical certificate / student pilot certificate, on there they're going to be asking your height and weight and eye color, hair color, all of that stuff. It has to match what is on your medical certificate. It has to be exactly as it is on the IACRA. So having all of that out and ready to go, kind of placing it out on the table, because they are going to ask for it. And then obviously your logbook, so you're going to have to get your logbook endorsements, and that's kind of all precursor. And what the DPE is doing at the initial is like, can we even start the check ride? Does he or she have everything that they need to get to the point where we can actually, type in IACRA that, we start the check ride and the clock is going? There are going to be minimum hour requirements, minimum number of cross country, minimum number of solo time, minimum number of total hours, and minimum number of dual instruction. And so your logbook will contain all of that, and he has to verify that all is, kind of contained within that.